Yeah, welcome very much to Conversations. Pleasure to welcome to the program a gentleman we spoke to that aired Tuesday, 2 days ago. That's being Anthony Gronowicz. And we were going to have a second program with another member of the Sterling team at the Green Party, that being Cleo Clark, who's running for the Senate, the United States Senate on the Green Party ticket. Tony, as you can see, is running for the 14th Congressional District, and we wish them all very well. But Cleo got called away, and she wasn't able to make it to this set. So Tony and I decided, why don't we have another talk where we could talk about things? And he's filling in that regard, and I thank you very much for continuing from the program we taped last Tuesday.
You're always welcome.
Thank you very much. So it was really good. We were talking about that, and I had said to you that I was anxious to talk to Cleo because I wanted to have Cleo be the guest on Thursday. And so forth, and also as a Green Party continuation and all that sort of thing, and joining up with the Occupy, and partly because she and I have a commonality in terms of the way we see things in a certain way. I love Cleo Clark. She's a civil rights leader from way back at the beginning, and she's a great friend and everything. But she and I have a sort of take, and we both have come to agree upon something that is a little bit hard for most people to understand, and that is that we have a great affection for the contribution of Muammar Gaddafi, the country of Libya, who was murdered by the uprising there. It was backed by NATO and the United States and that sort of thing. A lot of people saw it as imperialistic terms and that sort in traditional imperialistic terms. But we both had an admiration for him as a leader in the sense of understanding the zeitgeist and understanding things in a very large context. And so in that sense, Tony agreed to sit down. We could talk about things on perhaps a larger tablet. And so, Tony, again, welcome very, very much to Conversations. I mentioned to you, I see things a little bit differently than perhaps a political context we were talking about on Tuesday. And I see things sort of in terms of comprehensively looking at the universe, beginning with universe, or this why do we exist? The larger questions that come out of a comprehensive context. And we begin to understand things now that we understand now. They're getting that the universe of which we are a part is about, we know now it's about 13.7 billion years ago that this universe, which may be nested within parallel universes in terms of string theory that's coming up from the physics and so forth. They got a new telescope array connected with CERN called Lisa. That's the name of my daughter. They're going to get a picture of the shock wave of this Big Bang of this universe. They've got one now, the Wilkinson, the W map, that gets a picture of the shock wave of the beginning of this universe 13.7 billion years ago, within only 300,000 years of its occurrence. A picture of that.
Wow. That's
a heck of an ability for a consciousness in universe that we represent, our species, to take the measure of things. That's sort of part of a reading of human purpose or our place in the universe, which is a larger context. And then they've also got an array connected with CERN, where a huge array, where they're going to get the picture of the Big Bang, the shock wave of that, within a nanosecond of its occurrence. It's all in place. It needs financing. But the thing is, we've gotten the ability that would have been very difficult for anyone out of history been able to do. So there's a thing. We're now understanding also the beginning of evolution as occurring about this planet came into existence around 4.5 billion years ago, or 4.8, I'm not sure, in 3.8 years, billion years ago, began the first beginnings of the constituents of RNA, which was destined to coalesce and come into an evolutionary process that included DNA and included organic evolution 3.8 billion years ago. And once we get to organic evolution, we can have an understanding of the history of the world and the evolution of all the creatures and everything that exists on the planet. And we've come that is, the knowledge is coming in over the transom, like you and I sit on another occasion and so forth, with such a degree of rapidity now at this time. And I'd kind of like to put things in that perspective. We then would get to evolution of consciousness. We get to the evolution, we get to organic evolution and all the variety of the creatures, the flora, the fauna, and all the things that exist. And we have up the hominoid line, we had evolution 4 to 7 million years ago. Up the hominoid line, there was Australopithecine. There were no Homo sapiens. There were Australopithecine lucy, the leakies found. So we've evolved up the hominoid line. There was much that preceded it. And we were contained as a species, and you and I sitting here and talk, were contained in a temporal sense within Australopithecine, the species. That was there 7 million years ago, and then about 1.5 million years ago, there was a qualitative transformation up the hominoid line from Australopithecine to Homo habilis. And Homo habilis was an emergence of the new in terms of evolutionary development. And Homo habilis is that until about 200,000 years, the best guess is close, but it's got scientific grounding and scientific and conscious understanding that it was about 200,000 years ago that the Homo sapiens species, which again had been contained with Homo habilis in terms of a time frame, if you can understand the evolution of levels of consciousness, that Homo sapien evolved or developed through punctuated equilibrium. You have a steady state, and then there's a quickening, and the new appears, and the new variety appears. And our species appeared about 200,000 years ago. Most of that time we were in a wandering state of nature, embedded in nature, probably prey for a great deal of the time, running away from the cats that could run faster.
That's how I begin every history class.
All right, anyway.
With prehistory and precisely those running faster than the game, or the game is running faster than you.
I did geography. I had to study. My professor was my advisor and all that, and was the leading geographer. His name was Carl Sawyer. He worked for Kroeber out in Berkeley. And he had a theme, the seaside niche, ecological niche for early humanity would have been seaside, partly because there would have been a source of protein in the clams. Also, you had headlands that you could build protection against the cats, because we were probably prey most of the time. They had examples of jaguar teeth that would crush the skulls of many of the ancient people in that, because they would be eating us with regularity, like rabbits, some of the things. Anyway, but then we get to 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, we finally get Neolithic revolution, right?
Melting of the ice caps in the rivers.
Well, that had happened, that had had the ice ages, and that's getting very recent. But we had that development, and once we got to where we had agriculture and domestication of creatures that could be, a security from the food quest. So you got surplus, you get an ability to have the beginning of civilization, right? Or city dwelling, I think, is the literal translation of it. Ashley Montague wrote really well on it and everything. So we get to that, and that begins to be a window on the current. We begin to have then Hammurabi and pharaohs and ancient history. And then we had 4 different food places where food was domesticated to give security from the food quest. There was the wheat and barley in the west. You had rice in Russia, in a complex of foods around it. In China, you had a mix in the Indus Valley with the early civilizations. Then you had maize in Mesoamerica. There was a 4th major food complex, the High Highland food complex of the potato and the yucca and the quinoa. And you had civilizations develop that were, and we're all from Africa. So we get that point. And once we did that, you had then, at least we begin to get some records kept. We can begin to get an idea of history rather than projection of things of our on the evolutionary process, including mankind's self-reflective consciousness, being able to take the measure of what's it all about and some of these larger issues, as well as the ability to extend consciousness into the environment and make the world different than in the Eden-like sense, the way most of the creatures are embedded in nature. They can make some change. I mean, honeybees or beavers make dams. There's some of that and that sort of thing, but they do. So we're able to make the world different through the extended consciousness of technology or tools, primitive tools, and finally more complicated until we get into the era. And what that would give an advantage to a political class that might emerge out of those various groups or tribes around the world that develop, you'd get a political class that would be looking to deal with the intellectual capability and the skill of the people of the society to get weapons that would give them an advantage over the tribe in the other valley. So they could go and steal the grain and make their tribe strong against that, impose or intimidate or co-opt or the other, and build their tribe strong against the others. It's called realpolitik, or it's called, there's two ways of dealing with politics. One is called real politics. That's just being realistic. Don't be idealistic. Don't be tied up in some idealistic thing. Just deal with reality. Then the other is more German. Haushofer is realpolitik, which means who's ever got the gun wins, and whoever can conquer wins and set up the rules and do all the rest of it. And that still holds. It's still a matter of who's got the power in order to enforce or conquer other peoples and impose their system of understanding of the way the world works and so on. It still operates and informs the world politics now. It's who's got the guns and the power. And that extended consciousness finally became so Promethean on a couple of sides, one of which is on the destructive side of war making, where it used to be we were protected in our impotence by, even as recently as the Second World War. They just had a great little thing on public television last night about the Second World War, and it was fought, and it was great damage. And so, but we were protected in a certain sense. But after about 1905 or so, magic, special theory, relativity, nuclear, and then thermonuclear, Edward Teller, and weapon systems, the weapon systems finally got to be so Promethean that along about the year 1970, the modeling shows, the weapon systems that exist in silos and on the planet became, having never been so throughout all of the human experience, species lethal. The weapon systems that exist since about 1970 are capable of stopping the evolution of conscious evolution in universe, if we count humanity being, in a certain sense, the expression, the most developed expression of that intellectually and so forth. That's pretty an existential new reality. I think it was that was blowing in the wind more than all the issues that we think of as the 1970s or 60s. We had all the political things coming out of the historical pattern, you know, the civil rights and that kind of thing. But what was going on intellectually or comprehensively in a systems level was that we were transcending. We were coming, just as Homo sapien had been contained within Homo habilis. History we were contained within a historical context of development that we take and count. But if we go comprehensively, that we are coming to the end of the human experience in terms of the evolutionary process in this generation and in this universe. And that would be, that signals an existential new reality that should be taken into account by people of good conscience. And on that side, that would be on the killing side. But on the living side, we're also going through an existentially significant revolution of design capability, of being able to extend knowledge, of knowing more in a quickening kind of way. Like in a pregnancy, there's a quickening, and then there's a water break, and things happen in a certain time. And we're through good design and through the ability to do more with less in terms of very technological development of capability to provide what would be called livingry for the human society has been increasing. We find penicillin. We make advances. 175,000 tons of copper cable that doesn't have to be mined to lay a communications cable across the Atlantic Ocean is replaced by a 100-pound transponder on a satellite that can do it 1,000 times more efficiently. So there are gains being made on the living side to provide what would be called life support for the world population. It could be considered on a systematic template of the whole world society within an ecological order that were there. And so we get to that point, and there were people who modeled it, not the least of which was, there were many others, was Fuller, Buckminster Fuller, and other comprehensive thinkers of a design capability, that we were reaching a point where you could measure the world population and its trends in terms of what we call haves and have-nots, and get a ratio or a percentage of the world population through time that could realistically be seen to be a have. It's a very tricky thing because you have to have a definition of what it means to be a have in terms of material terms. And you could deal with it all within just strictly a materialistic context of evolution that has been developing here on this planet without all of the politics and things like that. But it is, and that the percentage of the population that could be seen to be have through technological extension of good design, doing more with less within an ecological context, the percentage of the world population that could be at the level of capability be seen to be haves was increasing through time as an almost axiomatic thing. And he had it projected that we were coming, it's an exponential process. We're coming out of history, and then it goes hyperbolic, and then it begins to go hyperbolic, and then it's destined to go exponential, which is really important. But he said we had about 10% of the world population could be realistically be seen to be happy. You'd have to have a definition of terms. What does it mean? It's not just food or for clothing or housing. It's intellectual, understanding, knowledge, all of these kind of criteria. And that we reached a point of about 10% by the First World War. A lot of the activity of humanity is based on war. Then we get the Second World, we got to about 20%. And he projected from 52 and others of the colleague, we had a 20-year period of imminent crisis as we crossed the 50% mark. All of this at the level of capability, not the reality. The reality was a reifying of institutions out of a qualitative context, out of history. We have institutions that we're tied to. They have to be somehow subsumed, but they had been subsumed within a dialectic and so forth, the one overcoming the other, conquering and so forth. But 50%, we crossed that line, and he said it could be accelerated. We crossed that line in his thinking, and there were many others who could follow on. There's a lot of modeling that can be done. That we crossed the 50% line about the same year, 1970, that we crossed the line when our capability had arrived where we could wipe out the process, the whole of the Homo sapiens species, which continues. And on the other side, where we could provide for everybody within a totally unprecedented reality that we had transcended, henceforth, material scarcity is an ontologic reality, if you can follow all of that. So in that kind of a context is the way you want to view things, that we're coming to the end of the 10,000 generation human experience in universe, and we're coming to the point of where we have the capability collectively through good design, including political institutions and so forth, but particularly a burden upon the intellectual community, to have close to something like what might be called an operating manual for spaceship Earth, which we do not have. all the king's horses and all the king's men have been either co-opted or bought off with tenure or whatever, and they've not been able to come up with something that the future requires in terms of how we're going to operate this interrelated system, spaceship Earth. One of the people who came up with because most of these things resulted from the United States of America made a break with feudalism in 1776. That was a major advance in terms of the political organization of the planet and thinking and so forth. Coley and I are of the opinion that one who made the example of the modern era that is thought of as historically legitimate. For 1,000 years, it was assumed historical legitimacy stood with the hereditary families. That was the way in which it finally got to be the divine right of kings, as they would say.
Oh, the history of great men.
Or great men, that's another way of seeing it. But it got down historically. Then there came the American Revolution in 1776, the steam engine, the Industrial Revolution. Most of the paradigm, most of the structures of the modern world that we are ensconced within comes from the American model, essentially. It was the United States of America made that. It informed more the French Revolution, I think, than the American did. It was signaling a change, and we need something new of that the model that we've inherited from that period and then reified in architecture, thinking, all kinds of philosophical understandings and so forth, is not adequate to what the future requires, but we're trying to impose that model upon the world as a model that's good for all time. And we're out of date. The way in which the political leadership, business leadership, intellectual leadership, by and large, in the absence of anything alternative that's being offered, is not adequate to what the future requires if we're to find our way through to obliterating the species. And again, the evolutionary potential of conscious alteration and advancement in a, let's say, anti-entropic function in the universe that the evolution of consciousness itself may be, that'll bring us into a way of being and relating in a liberated order, where every human being and the ecology is able to realize its full potential in a way that it never has. And that would be, if we get to that point, or have the means to get to that point of liberating humanity rather than annihilating it, a choice that's before us, there will be a resonancy, a synergistic resonancy of something more than the sum of the parts, like that will introduce us to another level of understanding within the universe that will help us to answer the ancient questions that confronted self-reflective consciousness when first it appeared. And it will be at a period, it can only be compared with speciation. We're leaving the human experience behind. Where have all the habili gone that we grew out of? So we're on that kind of a period of transformation. And the thing that we need to have are systems that are going to be able to navigate the alteration from the inherited institutions and all their reified order to one that is based upon another system. And our premise was that at the political economic level, that is mostly takes up the news and so forth, the country that was ahead of that pattern that the United States was doing, that I could find, and others of that, was the country of Libya. And Muammar Gaddafi was ahead of the curve. And we're very disturbed by the fact that NATO and Mr. Obama and so forth attacked them within a realpolitik kind of way of thinking and so forth, but that he had come upon the ideas of social organization that were ahead of history's curve, relevant to the future, and they were not allowed to mature and become operative as a model for other parts of the world for whatever reason. But even though it didn't, and it was able to overcome by greater power and imperialistic interest and all the other kind of things we can see in a normal historical pattern, the fact that he came up with the ideas was more important than anything, and that they will be not lost in history. So that's what we wanted to talk over with Collier Clark. And because we want to air again a program the day after this program is going to air that we did in 1991 with Muammar Gaddafi, and calling to the attention that he had dealt with the kinds of questions and reading of history, that he had a break with history. And so that's a long sort of thing that we wanted to talk over with Cleo, but now I've introduced it, and I don't know if there would be maybe I've gone on too long, but I just want to lay this thing out.
Your very
rather than talking
narrative.
Rather than talking in the normal received way in which we get the news and the understanding, is this a larger context? And some of the things about the way he tried to organize things, and the context and his what is the word? His
worldview.
Well, his worldview, yeah, but I was thinking of his heritage, not his heritage, his legacy. His legacy. He's been done in by powers and so forth. But his legacy will be not forgotten. That he's there as a model, and so that's something that I just introduced, and what it is that set him apart. And what was his thing? It was new. It was something new. And that's something that would be a way to introduce what is needed in terms of this operating manual for Spaceship Earth, the new context of understanding of within what context we're going to set up the rules by which the world's going to operate and so forth, is something that I would like to introduce and talk about in this hour. So, that said, welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry to have carried on.
No. I was listening very carefully.
Okay.
And I was following your long narrative that was intrinsically interesting in terms of the points and facts and issues that you raised and how it all was threaded together. But the problem, I see it, is that the ecological basis. I mean, Jefferson had it right in one sense when he talked about nature's God rather than God's nature, which would separate him from the earlier period. But
he wrote a good Bible too, where he took just the words of Jesus.
Right.
Yeah, the Jefferson Bible is worth paying attention if you're going to pay attention to that.
Well, Christ off the cross.
Yeah, right.
As opposed to on the cross.
Right.
But that crisis seems to have been ignored as it accelerated in its depth in terms of the burning of fossil fuels.
Well, okay,
and the dynastic stranglehold, especially in this country, over this. I'm talking about specific families who make their money off oil here and do not want to free us from this bondage, of which the dismantling of the public transportation system was part of its legacy, and the privatization of the transport and individualization, as exemplified by the automobile, which is essentially not going to work. I mean, if the Chinese try to emulate the Americans, which they are, we're done in terms of the proliferation of these vehicles that burn a carcinogen, which is gasoline, that in turn poisons the air, the water,
much less the coal to run the electric generating plants. Yeah, that's really
the same. But it's the same family because Jay Rockefeller runs and has run West Virginia for the past 40 years, either as a governor or senator from that state. He knew what he was doing when he got in there with the Peace Corps back in '62.
But I would suggest, if I may, the only thing that, if we're talking in terms of if we're talking about the terms of eliminating the Homo sapiens species, I can see where ecological results from, the carbon sequestration, all that, the carbon thing, would certainly lead to a situation where there would be tremendous upheavals and sort of thing, and maybe even political things going on. But the only thing, it seems to me, I don't think there's any natural force that in and of itself, whether it's, they talk of an asteroid, that could even be deflected now, or something like the 5 great extinctions that have occurred. But the only thing that would be able to wipe out, as it were, the whole species in and of itself are the weapons. And the weapons...
Well, also, yeah, that's true, but also...
The other would be
elimination.
the need to conditions that would unleash them, and it would be the weapons, something that would lead to the weapons and the unleashing by the United States of America. Is the only thing that could lead to that. And that's what worries me on top of everything else.
I wanted to introduce the fact that in the time of the dinosaurs, the atmosphere was 35% oxygen. It's currently 21% and continuing to go down because of the introduction of carbon into the atmosphere.
Well,
and the only thing that'll save that is to plant more trees, but I'm talking about jungles of trees, not individual trees on streets, a la Bloomberg.
We got to keep a way open for some synergistic things. The universe is synergetic, and the human of history is, and everything is.
Well, I'm talking about human habitation. I'm talking about human.
I understand. But synergy is the behavior systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts. I think we're very well. There's going to be breakthroughs in terms of all kinds of things that can get over that problem. That problem. What I'm talking about, the problem is the ignorance of a way, of a vision of how we're going to operate.
I mean, I think you put forward a very, more than adequate, very admirable vision in the first 20 minutes, which captured my interest. The question is, we're at a crossroads.
No, more than a crossroads, if I may. We're at a point of qualitative transformation.
Well, yeah. But the question, can we make that leap?
Yeah, and what's the context in which we can do it? We made the example in that premise that we transcended at the level of capability, that's knowledge, that's growing. And it's not only just the bandwidth of technology and cell phones and things that is going exponential. The knowledge base is growing exponential.
Well, I agree, but
we have wait a minute, if I may, if we have transcended material scarcity, there is enough for all, henceforth, as there never has been of the human.
Well, that's a question of distribution. It's a question of distribution.
No, it's not. No, if I may.
Well, there are people who don't have enough. And there are people who have too much. It's Citizen Kane.
But that's talking historical, if I may.
Well,
I'm trying to
reality.
Say, no.
So many people without.
So much has to do with economics, if you could.
Sure.
Economics is often declared. That's one of the disciplines into which they've divided the intellectual community, divide and conquer the intellectual community. Nobody's thinking systems.
I agree.
They're not thinking systems. Where is their systems thinking? Isaac Asimov, we did a program. He said he thinks this is the defining generation. Defining after 10,000. They don't get that into, you don't hear that.
That's the Occupy movement.
Well, that is perhaps, if they go broad enough, because what they'd have to do is encompass.
Well, they are.
But they haven't. They haven't gotten there yet.
Well,
I would suggest they haven't. When they get there, they can be, because in my way of thinking, in order for them to be able to get there, they're going to have something that's not only able to identify all the bastards that were doing things bad, because if you want to know where things are bad and falling apart, they're legion. Everything is falling apart. So that goes on endlessly. You can blame this or that or this or that. Everything. They're blacks.
But working together.
Yeah. No, but if you get them all together, if you put them all together, you have a systems thing that is based upon different criteria than the special interest of whatever somebody else is trying to find.
Working together synergistically. Working together.
That's right.
Well, that's what's happening. They're trying.
They're trying.
It's not even a year yet. It's not
but
even
the
a year
academia, education.
But ivory towers towered.
The educational system does not work. What they're doing with the educational system, what they're doing with
because it's a system that's too narrowly conceived and perceived.
Okay, now, So if you get to the point where you've transcended material scarcity, you never can hear. Every economist, they will say as a premise, economics is the allocation of scarce resources.
That's right.
It's an assumption ipso facto absurd to say anything else. It's ipso facto absurd that there is enough for everyone henceforth. It can't be. Because there will be people who will say, do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
All of our institutions were predicated upon an assumption that may have been transcended in terms of material evolution.
I agree. It's a
No, but
question
no.
of ownership and
Why do we
distribution.
never hear it? We
Because
never hear
the people
anybody
in power
saying.
don't want you
No,
to
no.
hear it.
Now you're going to blame them.
Of course I'm going to
Okay,
blame
I'm
them.
going to
They're
say it's your
responsible.
fault
No,
for
it's not.
thinking about them, because what's going to happen in order to have a thing that's going to work in terms of getting to this point, you're going to have something that can be liberating of the poor, suffering masses, which
Right.
are being, and always have been, right? All through history, it's a nightmare of
well,
injustice.
right.
James Joyce
Do it
and
in
everyone
inequality,
said,
do it in
okay,
inequality
yeah,
of
do it in
resources.
inequality, all of that, right? All of that, and then they've had other suggestions, but you're going to have to have something that can be liberating of the masses of the people and all the variety and so on, within an ecological context, which is possible through good design. We got a possibility there
I agree.
that is not
As far as you've
ignored.
stated it,
They're
yes.
only just doing it within the old context. But the ultimate challenge, you're going to have something that is so comprehensively appropriate to the liberating of the masses of the people within an but the ultimate thing is it would have to something that will go through the whole and inform the whole, not just part of it, or one picture. It's not just Napoleon going off to Moscow saying, "Come."
But the
now,
whole
wait a minute, let me
seeks to
finish.
be not informed.
No, the formed is not. We do not have a comprehensive vision from the intellectual community that's falling down. We have no comprehensive
That's why the
thinkers.
elites are abandoning the society and put everything offshore.
Well, that's a
precisely.
smaller issue
Well,
within
that's a
the
huge
context
issue.
in which we're trying to talk.
Right.
It is no. That's
But we need
one.
the resources. We need to.
There are adequate resources.
But we
There
must
is-
seize control of those resources.
Well, now wait a minute.
That's where
But
Occupy comes in.
Well, Occupy. I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Obviously, we hope you're right. But the ultimate challenge is to have something that's not only liberating of the people, but one that is able to be grasped, maybe haltingly, by those who have the ownership of the capital assets and said, oh, well, maybe something that would make sense.
Well,
Something that would prevent them from just saying no. And they will be finally included, as well as everybody else, in the pattern that would be opening to a new way of being.
but there's no incentive for them
because
to
all
do
we're
so.
caught up in is a dialect of who's the bad guy.
Well, no, but
Everybody's caught up who's the bad
but
guy.
Harold, there's no incentive for them to do so. They can always
Them,
hop a plane.
us.
Bloomberg can always hop a plane and
Now
go to
you see you're
Bermuda.
falling. If I may,
Well, he's the power.
no,
he's
you're
the power.
Yeah. But the thing is,
You can't even walk down the street if you're black and Latino without being stopped and frisked, thrown against the wall.
I know, it's a
beaten
pain
up.
in the-
Well,
yeah.
no, it's horrible.
I know.
It's a violation of basic human rights.
We talked about it last program.
Of course.
Yeah, right.
So when he's got to stop doing that.
So we get back
It's
to Mr.
accelerated. It's accelerated, as I said. It's up 10 times over it was when he took
I know
office.
that. Yeah, but that's the thing I'm trying to get back to the idea that we need vision at a comprehensive level. That's why I like
on a horizontal
one of
level
the
with
things,
the Occupy movement.
horizontal, not here. It's not just ladies' rights. It's not just black rights. It's not gay rights. It's not these rights. It's not that rights. It's not legal rights. It's going horizontal.
Well, that's
and
what the
it'll
Occupy
do,
movement does.
it
When I
would-
was
no,
at
it
the
doesn't.
meeting 2
It
nights.
hasn't got there.
Well, no, but the people represented are all those constituencies that you just represented. All those identities were present at a meeting at the staff analysts 2 nights ago.
With due respect, the alternate, if we sit here and say, Nick the Greek would probably think that the odds are we're going to stop consciousness. They want to bomb Iran. Existential threat.
Well, who wants to do
no,
it? The
no,
1% does. I don't. Occupy doesn't.
No. Okay. No, but they don't. Let's put it this way. Those who are in charge do not have a vision adequate to what's required. Those who are opposing them do not have a vision that's worthy of concentration.
So what's the vehicle?
Well, that's why
to make them comprehend
well,
your
one of the
eloquent
things
vision
is
that you outlined in the first 20 minutes of history.
The two first things that we come to after all of that is comprehensive, is to finally get at there's some reason for being in universe. What are we here for? What's it about, Alfie? What it's about is having...
You and I are interested in that, and a lot of the young generation that's involved in Occupy is, but the people in power are not interested.
Well, you see, if I may, okay.
I don't see any examples. Show me a person that is. And I don't mean the exception. I mean a sizable, significant chunk.
You're going to, in order to get, well, the sizable...
That's what Volcker said. Nobody's going to respond. They're going to let it happen.
Well, okay, anyway, trying to proceed with that is that idea. What do you think about the idea that you got to include everybody?
They don't want to include everybody.
No, don't go to that. They're going to say they don't. They're going to say you don't want to.
No. They're the ones that put wretched refuse on the Statue of Liberty. They're the ones that regard people coming here as strangers or illegals or aliens. They're the ones that are excluding other people. We are not.
Well,
we
then,
are all inclusive.
back off from that, because that's an ideological stance, and a lot of people have that, and people on the left have that, and I think a lot of the problems...
The Statue of Liberty has that.
How are we going to encompass them in some way? And it goes back to Mr. Gaddafi now. Now, when Mr. Gaddafi set it up, he had a country, it was interesting.
Yeah.
He had only 4 million people. When I hitchhiked through there as a young man in 1954, 57, and they were the poorest people on the earth, almost. They had below them a lot of potential in oil, and it was coming and so forth. They made a revolution in 1960. At that time, they had 6% literacy and everything. And then they had all of this wealth. When Idris left, he made a revolution in a traditional political way. And they got great amounts of money, like Norway. They had money from oil. It was very rich, good oil, close to the market, all the advantages. And he was instrumental in helping to get OPEC going. He was a thorn in the side of American imperialists. The first thing he did when he came into power was to make them all leave the Wheelus Air Force Base, which was a military presence on the North Coast, very strategic. First thing, made them leave. He had a great deal of concern for, and what he did is he had his money and he set up a society. He passed it. He spread it around, socially or governmentally. So we got public sector, private sector. We got private property, public domain, the commons and all that. So he did it through the government. He set it up and they passed it around. And by the 20 years, they went from being the poorest people in the world to where they had the highest ratings of everyone. 98% literacy. Everybody had education. Everybody owned their own home. Everybody had education. Everybody had health. He did it governmentally, through the government.
But he had oil.
He had oil.
To do it.
He had that's surplus.
Right.
You see, we made the premise.
We
made the premise, Tony. There's enough.
Yeah.
Now, nobody can think in terms, and certainly the business models in it, they can't think in terms there is enough, because there never has been. That's a historical change.
Yeah, but it was all rested on the fact that he had all that oil.
Well, okay.
In Eastern Libya.
Okay, he had that oil. Okay, that was a condition. We had a hell of a natural resource base for the American experiment. Okay, there was enough. Okay, but
this is more than enough. It was late as the 50s. People of plenty.
Okay, but then it gets down to what else did he do? He set it up to where, in terms of politics, you used the term of the program we did a couple days ago, participatory. He set it up to where the whole damn country was divided up into. They had tribal traditions. They divided it up into what they call people's congresses. They actually got together. Everybody in the country would get together at a conference where there would be it's like a town meeting. Right. Everybody had access to a place where they physically would be participating in decision making.
Well, they have it on the local level in Switzerland too.
No, I'm talking now about they would have it on there. He had this set up. This is out of whole cloth.
Right.
Like the United States came out of whole cloth. They didn't have to worry about the assize courts and the powdered wigs and all the bullshit that there was from Europe, okay? He didn't have to worry about all the stuff we're tied up with, thinking it is so precious that we have. But he set up, and everybody would meet, and they would talk about, well, this is the money, this is the international context, this is the national, there's local, you need a traffic light, everybody owned their own home.
But Cooper talks about upstate New York like that, American Notes and American democracy.
Okay, anyway, he set it up, and that they would have sovereignty. He wanted to have, he claimed, he wanted to have sovereignty at a political level. Everybody over 18, men and women, would meet. He wanted a participatory democracy. He didn't have a Congress. He didn't have election political parties.
But he was the eternal head.
He was not. He was the intellectual head. But he set up a participatory democracy. And I went to a lot of those meetings. The people would be talking about the issues. They'd be informed. They were involved. It was like a participatory democracy for a relatively small country. But at the level of politics, everybody had a place where they could go and participate politically in the affairs of the nation. They had to vote on the water project. They brought a faucet of water up from the whole. He wanted to have sovereignty at the level of the people's congresses, and then have committees committed by the people. So he wanted a participatory political system rather than a representative one that we seem to think is essential. They don't. A participatory democracy is in advance of what we're saying the world has to do with pink thumbs and elections and things like that, because it mimics our system. We are behind in terms of the people who think that he was ahead on that. On the second order, he did not overturn or throw over like a lot of left people would like to do. They have a big a brief against the institution of private property. They don't in the Arab culture particularly, and he represented Islam as well, which is 1.5 billion people. It's a large part of the world. They had a private sector, and you could have a private sector there to encourage you to do it. He would encourage you to start a business. I went with some guys, they're going to do a pasta factory. No, it was pasta or something they were going to do. And he had a rule. And in Libya, you drive around Libya when he was there, on signs, little Burma shave signs everywhere, because the left is all informed by this labor theory of value. And they don't like private property. They don't like the private sector, right? That's the thing. No,
depends.
I mean,
there was NEP.
And it's okay
There's
with them
Cuba
for them to be, because the left is, the people all have a job on the estate owned by the few people who own all the assets and resources, like serfs. It is the same continuation of the feudal order, except they got a little minimum wage
Well,
increases.
I mean, you have to look at the historical sequence and what was.
Let's not go too much at the historical. We're trying to get to
I'm
the...
a historian.
I know, but we're trying to get to...
I look at what's feasible at a given point in time.
Well, what's feasible
at a given point in time. And Gaddafi was feasible in a given point in time, but ultimately it was not feasible because of external factors as well as
the external factors are the problem.
As well as the personality cult that developed around him.
Well, that's true if you say so, but I'll tell you one thing. You used to go to those meetings. Stokely was there. Vernon Bellecourt was there. All of the American Indian nations who have been stolen,
right,
their land, everything by us.
That was at the outset of his rule.
No, that was the whole time. He was loved by the people.
But I said he comes into power in '69, so
he came into power in '69, and he was always, and the people, the American Indian nations that are being Evo Morales and all of this, and that they've been stolen by our example. Black people all over Africa at the level of the people liked Gaddafi very much. He was trying to set up the United States of Africa, but more to the point on the public sector or the private sector. He didn't do away with the private sector. You could have a private sector. You can do a business. You can do a business. You know the one rule he had? This doesn't sit so well with the lefties, the liberals.
Well, I wouldn't conflate the two,
you know what
anyway.
You know what he said? He said you could have a business and everything, and it says you couldn't hire anybody. You could not hire anybody to work in your business. You couldn't have any paid wages. Now, all we talk about is having paid wages and jobs.
So how did they support the business?
You had to be an owner of the capital assets of the business. Everybody involved had to be an owner of the capital assets. We do nothing in America to bring ownership of capital assets as a means of distributing demand in America.
Well, we have some cooperatives.
No, we don't, but not really. The capital assets are all owned by a tiny plutocratic class. And the left says, oh,
I'm talking
that's
about-
okay. You own all the assets, you guys. You're getting richer. You're going to get more. Just give us a little bit of a good wage or a minimum wage and through jobs.
Well, that's
and
the
all
liberal,
we say
that's
is
the
jobs.
liberal approach.
That's the liberal.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily left. There are many shades of left.
Well, I don't know where the left is, but the left has got a hard on, excuse my language, against private property. They want to have the commons. And they can understand it. There could be.
Well,
We're
that's
going
what
to need
Occupy
something mixed.
wants, the commons.
Okay, Naomi Klein also wants to have both mixed economy, not some all at once, all in one.
Right.
Okay, he set up a thing where, and they had signs everywhere, partners, not wage earners. Partners, not wage earners. Not wage earners, not jobs,
Well,
not
that
wage
sounds
earners.
like Walmart,
That
associates.
is, no, it
They
doesn't.
don't call them workers or employees. They call them associates.
That's baloney.
Well, of course it's
The
baloney.
assets are owned by a tiny plutocratic class.
Well,
Now,
I agree. But I'm just
the
saying
way
people-
we form
use
capital, why
language.
do we allow capital to be formed where only accumulated savings is the means by which you can do it, when really the business decision is to tap into the earning power, the future earning power that the capital assets represents, get ownership of that. Private property, corporate stock ownership in the hands of Joe citizen as a way of distributing demand and buying power rather than only a job. Why do we default and allow them just to cooperate, just grow richer and richer and richer because they own what is increasingly creating the wealth in relation with labor, and all they can do is say, let's get a job for everybody, a massive estate.
Well, people have
That's
to
what
support
we're representing.
themselves.
That's what we're doing now. He was ahead of history's curve.
Yes, but he was dealing with a very tiny
wa-
slice of human.
Well, you know, we were dealing with a very tiny slice of humanity when we made a revolution in the United States of America
Built
against
on
the great
slavery.
feudal orders.
built
no,
on,
no,
built
but
on
you
slavery
don't-
and
you don't
indentured
see-
servitude.
You don't say, okay, two interests. Form capital in a way where everybody has an ownership stake. You have to have set up a new kind of system. Rather than jobs,
Right.
they have to own the capital assets of the private sector. Democratic ownership of
Right.
that as a means
That
of
would be nice.
distributing
but
demand,
how
which
are you
could
going to
allow
politically
us.
affect this?
Pardon?
How would you politically
Well,
affect
first
this,
of all,
though?
you'd have to have some mention of the fact that it's a possibility rather than
sure.
only talking
It's a
about.
possibility, but you also have to look at facts on the ground.
You look at facts on the ground, that's right. And I'll tell you, back in Europe, they were very disturbed. It took them a long time. They're still celebrating Queen Elizabeth, the feudal order from Europe. It was hereditary. They had 1,000 years of that. We've got all these hundreds of years, 200 years of institutions that are outdated.
Well, this queen isn't even
The
related
system
to
that we
Elizabeth.
have in the United States is in existential trouble, is it not?
No, it's
There-
it's an economic and social crisis.
Well, it is economic and social. It comes out to be existential when you get to the point where they've got weapon systems that can wipe out the system.
Sure.
And they're setting up the predicate for a police state because they don't have a vision. Because these people
Well,
are
I
going to
agree.
overturn us.
I agree.
Aren't they thinking the enemies are at the gate and the people that are at the enemy of the gate think we're going to overthrow
Well,
them?
They think the people are the enemy, the people
Yeah, right.
in power.
Right.
Because the people
for
in
one
power
thing,
know what
nobody's
they've done, even if the people don't realize fully the extent of the damage that they've caused to the society and the social and
Yeah,
psychological
but what about
fabric.
the people not presenting any alternative?
They're trying.
No, nobody is. I don't see anybody.
Well, you don't see
Who
it because
is?
you're watching television too much.
No,
But
no,
in
I
this
don't.
room, no, Occupy is trying to do this. Other people are trying to do this.
I don't. Who?
The various movements are trying to create genuine, participatory,
Based upon what?
horizontal.
What about their idea of Kelso? Okay, Kelso had that. Russell Long, they did it. They got a thing going. It may have a little bit of a glimmer of a chance that you can distribute ownership. And if you're a businessman, you're going to make an investment. And if you're going to make an investment, it's an investment that's going to pay for itself out of its future earnings. 5-6 years, it'll pay for itself.
But Robert
so
Owen
you don't
tried.
have it all.
Robert Owen tried this in the 1840s, in the 1830s.
Well, that was a different era. And there
Well,
was some
but the
sort-
point is it failed because it couldn't compete with
So
the
there-
industrial capitalists.
Okay. I'm suggesting that Muammar Gaddafi had a model that at an economic and at a political leader, he had a model for a participatory democracy
Right,
in terms of political decision making,
right.
and for an economic democracy at the level of owning of private property assets by everybody.
But he also owned a lot of private property.
Yeah, he did. And there was some.
So he didn't practice what he preached.
Well, no.
this is a problem.
Okay. Well, I think you're going to find. I think we're going to find that he was ahead of history's curve. That we're going to. That's the biggest issue. How are we going to form capital? How are we going to make investment decisions? Are we going to leave it all up to the banks? Are we going to have a government role? You're going to have to set up some sort of within the government structure, a capital diffusion reinsurance corporation, reassuring the industry insurance, AIG and so forth, against loss, because they have to have some way of dealing with risk, and you have to separate risk and venture from the everyday, the Glass-Steagall. You can't have it all combined into one, but you have to have a system that will legitimately display ownership to the mass of the people in the way the capital is formed. There's various ways in which that can be done.
Well, but you have to look at everything in historical context. Glass-Steagall.
No, history is something to be included or subsumed, not to be led.
No,
you're not led by history. You got to be led by a future.
History is the queen of the muses. It determines all because it encompasses all.
It doesn't encompass all. It doesn't encompass.
Human experience.
Nietzsche said, if I may, Tony, Nietzsche said, okay, the future influences the present as much as the past.
I agree.
Future is something else other than just reifying the outdated, and we were contained within Homo habilis. We were representative of something in advance. Humanity is contained, and it's going to be in advance. We have to realize we need something new that can bring justice. We don't have it in the international order that's here now, and Occupy's not coming up with it. Occupy's not coming up with it. They haven't come up with it. The left hasn't come up with it. The progressives, the intellectuals haven't come up with it. Nobody's come up with it.
And Kelso has come and gone.
Kelso has not gone.
He's gone.
You think he is? Well, if you think he is, then maybe he is.
Who out there is out there Kelsoizing?
No.
Other than...
Well, talking about the one that did it at a national order was Gaddafi. That's a point. That resonates with a lot of people, the poor people of the world.
Right.
That does resonate. Why it doesn't resonate, and the thing that gets them upset, is that he didn't want to do away with the private sector. You have to have something that's going to be including everybody. And you're going to have to be able, there are people within the plutocracy that will be able to understand something that they can understand.
Yeah, but he also didn't completely practice what he preached.
We haven't, well, who?
Gaddafi.
Well, and nobody's done it perfect. But what it is it's the idea and the framework of thought that you look for in terms of those kind of situations. And then also this idea, we've got to have something that's going to include everybody, including you can't leave it up to the plutocrats. They don't have the vision. You don't expect a tiger.
Well, of course I don't want to leave it up to the plutocrats. But the plutocrats
No, but you have to include them in the model. In the model,
they don't want to be included in our model.
Well, you're making a lot of assumptions that are going to lead to disaster.
I have a lot of empirical evidence that they're not interested.
Well,
they're outsourcing everything and sequestering wealth outside the country.
Well, they're doing things.
They have no sense of social responsibility, as the 21 to 32 trillion offshored.
Yeah, that thing we did on that last program.
Right.
Yeah.
That shows absolutely going in the other direction.
Well, you know, I
so
saw,
they're going to create a civil war.
John Reed used to be head of Citigroup. Remember? See, he was the largest banker. He was bigger than Sandy Weill in that. He was there. He was on Bill Moore's the other day. He was the head of Citigroup.
Right.
Head of Citigroup. Reed. I think it's John Reed, the head of Citigroup. He said, I think there's quite a bit to be said for this Occupy movement.
Well, I'm sure.
Now, you got to get people like that who can think, and we've got to be
presenting... And Sandy Weill, who benefited from Citibank, is now saying, well, maybe the bank should be broken up. The point is, he didn't practice what he preached. He amassed all this wealth, and he can sit back and say, well, it shouldn't have been done that way, but it was done, but I'm not going to give up my wealth.
Well, I'm not telling you. Look, if you get to the point...
Only one person gave up his wealth, and that was Carnegie. And Gates is the other one. But the exception does not prove the rule.
Yeah.
These guys are not going to...
well, you see...
They're going the other direction.
Well, okay, I'm just making...
That's what this whole point of this tax outsourcing or tax avoidance is... exemplifies.
Well, you have to, if you have to choose at this time in terms of what we got and everything, of course, you're with the left. You're with the people. Everybody's with them. Yeah, you got to do it. But what, you got to think outside the box.
Well, I'm thinking.
You got to think outside the box.
I don't think outside the people and the environment.
That you can get to and have them be able to begin to understand an alternate way that is inclusive
But you
of
also
them,
have to be
as well
sensitive
as
to
is
the needs
inclusive.
of the other species as well.
Absolutely, it's got to be ecological. All of that's a great demand. But that's the promise of the age. I think Gaddafi's going to live. His legend's going to come back. And I think he's going to make league with a lot of those people that have overthrown him. And that there's a great deal. But I'm very encouraged by Mr. Reed saying, I think there's a great deal to be said for the Occupy. Because they're going to want, it's as much in their interest to get to a comprehensive context as it is
Well,
ours.
I have to look more into the substance of what he said rather than merely agreeing in that very simple fashion.
You don't just trust him right at face value, one of the plutocrats?
No, I don't. because
I'm shocked, Tony. I'm shocked.
Because they are, without their money, they'd be nothing.
Tony, sorry. I've been bending your ear all this
That's
time.
all right.
And
I
everything,
enjoyed
but I really
the first
do.
20 minutes. I enjoyed very much.
Well, okay.
Actually, maybe the first 30. I wasn't keeping time because
well, then
it
you
was
went
very
to sleep.
interesting.
You went to sleep.
I never went to sleep.
Oh, okay. Anyway, your pleasure, Tony Gron,
I
filling
wasn't at
in
all.
for as a bridge over to Muammar Gaddafi that we're going to air tomorrow, to the chagrin of a great number of people who think the guy's gone. I think his legacy is going to live. He's
okay.
ahead of the curve. And also the memory of Louis Kelso that resonates with him, the only one that did. And so anyway, Tony, thanks for coming in and sitting through this. And
No, I enjoyed
filling
it.
in.
I liked the narrative. The first 20 minutes I thought was very, very good.
I think we're getting to the
Just when
end.
we got to the present.
We're coming to the, well, that's where the president is. Your pleasure to have his perceptions. We're coming back again tomorrow. Tomorrow should be a repeat of a 1991 interview with Muammar Gaddafi, laying out his way of thinking, which is really ought to be given serious consideration by the Occupy movement, trying to move horizontally into new territory beyond the dialectic of that informs so much of political concern, in my humble opinion. We need comprehensive vision. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks again, Harold.
Again, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So, I used to love going there. It was like a pirate's den. You had to be smuggled in and all that, and all the best people were there. I loved Stokely Carmichael. He was great. He was so funny.